Commonwealth's attorneys and I have concluded that the NCAA sanctions were overreaching and unlawful.
Someone's got to develop a product that you and I as a consumer are going to want to buy.
The country needs a comprehensive energy plan.
Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. My guest today, Barb Duran, who is running for the Board of Trustees with Penn State. First question, well first let me welcome you to the show, Barbara. And
Thank you,
let me
Steve.
ask you this question to start off. What are you thinking running for that board?
I've had not a few people ask me that, but I'll tell you, it's interesting because I had been, first of all, I graduated from Penn State
Right.
in 1975. That's been the worst part of this. I've been outed on my age, but, and I was an English major at Penn State, played 3 varsity sports, was very involved in the women's activist thing then because that was the Title IX era.
Sure.
So anyway, subsequently, probably about 6 years ago, I was invited to be on the campaign. We're running a multi-billion-dollar campaign right now. And I am on what is called the Varsity S Committee, which is going after the varsity athletes. And so what amazed me in the time that I had graduated and from the time I was on the campaign, how different the university has become. Academically, it is so much stronger in every area. When I was there, it was primarily ag and engineering, and the rest was not as good as that. And that plus when coming back, Joe Paterno was Joe Pa. He had not been called that. He had become this legendary figure, and his very DNA was in the university values. And it was really, Penn State has become, it always was a good place, but it became an extraordinary place. So that when this all happened, I really, the sense of injustice about it, because I knew Turner's reputation, I knew what the university had become, and it all just seemed so inappropriate, to say the least, in terms of the actions that were taken by the board. So, because I had not even considered running for the board or even being interested in that. The university seemed to be well run at that point. And, but it was really the things that happened then, and of course many things that have happened since then, that the reason I ran last year when I came in, out of 86 candidates, which was actually fantastic, very tough for people to sort through, but it was amazing alumni that stepped up and showed how much they cared, that they wanted to be personally involved. So last year I ran, it was like a political campaign. It was not, I think, the normal board run where you put in your bio and you send out emails or get people to vote for you. You really, people have websites and Facebook, which I do this year, and have a wonderful social media guy, a local guy, and website, and to really communicate, because none of the candidates can get the alumni mailing list. So it's very difficult to reach people, to let them know who you are and what your views are. So anyway, I had come in a very close fourth last year, was delighted with the 3 candidates who got elected, because, particularly, everybody knows Anthony Lovrano. He's been out there and speaking up for many, many people, and I happen to agree with just about everything he says. And of course, Ryan McCombie, who, true to his Navy SEAL training and his idea of the military strategy is to work very much quietly, but very effectively, and they're both, and Adam I haven't gotten to know that much. I know he spoke up recently in a meeting, and for having, his rare speaking up, it makes even that much more impact. But anyway, so having come in fourth and having a lot of people that really wanted me to run, it was not a question for me, because there's still so much to do. And in the last year, I also kept very involved, because on the board or not, there's so much that everybody can do. And you've seen that, in this last year, whether it's speaking engagements, editorial, people taking bus rides up to Harrisburg to weigh in. It's been a tremendously widespread and deep involvement on the alumni, and many of them trying to reach out, to the board. But anyway, that's a very long answer to your question.
We're going to go back through into the middle of things now.
Great.
First of all, how do you run for this? I'm familiar with how to run for a political campaign, but this is a unique universe. So how do you run for this office? First of all, who's eligible to vote for the Board of Trustees, people that are running?
Well, it's all alumni, and then there's various categories. You'd have to look it up exactly, but if you had 2 years here or 1 year, there's variations. If you basically took some classes at Penn State, you are eligible to vote. But they outline that exactly on the BOT site. So
I'll have to look, because I did take one summer here of classes, so you may have a vote sitting right here across the table from you. Now, There are how many
Yeah.
spots up this year on the trustees board up for election?
Well, for the alumni, and if we can go in more depth on the whole thing if you like, but there, out of 32 members on the board, there are 9 that are for alumni. And every year, 3 spots open up because it's a 3-year term.
Okay.
So it's 3 again this year with 2 incumbents running again. So because there has been an empty seat, Steve Garvin, as you know, resigned in the summer, and that seat has remained vacant. So
And there was no one picked to fill that seat.
Well, it's in the bylaws. The chairperson can appoint somebody, but for various reasons chose not to.
So there are 3 positions running this year, 3 open seats this year.
Right.
And there are how many people running for those 3 seats?
Well, it's a lot fewer than last year, 39.
Okay.
Which is still substantial.
From my
and still wonderful.
From my political strategy
Yes.
background, let me
Yes.
ask, is there not a way that you could have talked amongst yourselves about trying to put maybe 3 to 5 people up against the other 3 incumbents? Or has there not been that sort of an organized group to do that kind of thing?
That's interesting. You mean in terms of campaigning against the 2?
Well, since there's so many of you, you're spreading the vote out versus those narrow ones that are running.
It's an interesting question because obviously everybody, is running on their own. But I think there's different alliances forming, and I'm sure you know about. There's a reformist group called Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship. I'll call it PS4 for short because it's a mouthful, and I'm always, having to take 10 minutes to do it. But they started just after the infamous November 11 meetings where Joe Paterno was fired, and I think that was a big impetus, and of course has taken on more things there. But they have actually are now up to 18,000 members, and they started a formal process last year where anybody could apply to get their endorsement. And I was one of them because I thought, if you can't reach the alumni, you can't advertise unless you're, someone with very, very deep pockets,
Sure.
which, I am not. And also, advertising, it's interesting for a Board of Trustees election, but it's how do you reach people? How do you let them know? And in the social media day, yes, you can tweet and you Facebook and all that, but even that is limited reach, and it can help. And so PS4 did an endorsement process, and I think last year, I don't remember the exact number, but it was a huge number. 70 people or something applied, and they had long essays, and they went from 10, they picked the top 10, and they had a committee, and
Sure.
a very diverse and very credentialed Penn State alumni, obviously all Penn State alumni. And then they winnowed it down to 6 people, and then you had to write more essays, which
Right.
actually I loved that process. Of course, I was an
English
English
major,
major, was I love to write. But I also thought it was a great way to push through and really make you think through the issues and exactly. And it was a very productive thing. Anyway, so then what they did, and the same thing they're doing this year, they narrowed it down to 6 candidates that the committee chose, and then the membership
Gotcha.
voted. Right.
Okay.
But what's interesting, but I think your question.
Let me stop you there for a
Sorry,
second.
I know. Okay.
We'll talk about the issues when we come back.
Yes.
You're watching For the Record with Penn State trustee candidate Barb Duran. Back with more after this. Welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with Barbara Duran, who's running for the Penn State Board of Trustees this year. Barbara, we were talking about the endorsement process. What types of questions is this group asking each individual candidate before you're getting that endorsement?
Well, it's a lot to do with the issues. It's number one, they're trying to find out your background.
Right.
What your leadership abilities are, because clearly, you have many credentialed people, wonderful people, but it's a question of, can you be effective? Are you unafraid to speak out on the issues? Because clearly there's been so much that's been going on, and we need people who are going to really stand up. And I think because that's one thing that alumni have been very upset, and that nobody seems to be defending Penn State and our culture, like the Free Report. We're just allowing this narrative that others are telling about us to stand and not challenging it.
Let's roll right into that. Let's talk about your feelings about the Free Report, and first of all, the process of why they picked Louis Free to do the report in the first place.
Yeah, well, it's a big issue, clearly, because it has really, there was already very negative public opinion about us. And if you remember, when the presentment came out, which was so incredibly inflammatory and prejudicial, and talking about anal rape, which, of course, in the trial, that was one of the charges that he was acquitted of, that Sandusky was acquitted of in the shower. So that, where was I on that?
Well, the way the report was written, it was almost written based on who hired the person to write it. I mean,
Oh,
that's what some
well,
people are thinking.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I've
Oh,
heard.
I was saying about the public opinion was already bad, and then the free report really reinforced it. And I guess there's been issues, a question about Ken Fraser, who is on the board, and his connection with free. And there are some connections, and although apparently they interviewed other people, it's hard to say. I mean, I think we're getting into the realm of opinion there about Louis Freeh.
And from the some of the people that weren't interviewed for the free report, you know, those are the primaries who are still waiting trial, and that goes into another realm as well.
Yes.
I mean, who was actually interviewed?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about who was interviewed outside of free in order to get the job.
Yes.
No. I mean, the free report, I mean, I think everybody was hoping, and I know some board members were hoping that this would really get to the bottom of things. You know, who did what, when, what really happened. And unfortunately, when I read the report when I first sat down to read it, I was very excited. Thank God, we're finally going to know what happened here. But frankly, I was stunned by the report itself because it was hardly, what's the word? It was very emotional. It was very judgmental. There were so many. When you don't have the key players being interviewed, and one was dead, two were under indictment. Spanier apparently was interviewed just before the report was released, which means it was pretty much written. And when you read there was an interview that Jeff Toobin in the New Yorker did of him before he was indicted and he could speak to the press. And there was a lot of interesting things he had to say that were not in the report, so that things that when he was quoting the report, either it was ignored or distorted. And they didn't interview McCreary. They couldn't interview, and there's some good reasons, but when you do that, you have to say that, we really couldn't find out. And what he didn't say in the free report, which I find amazing, which I found out subsequently, is that apparently all emails were lost. All university emails were lost prior to 2004 because of some technological changeover. So the only emails they had were Gary Schultz's file. Now, one thing that was interesting last week, Ken Fraser had said, he was defending the free report and saying, and he unearthed these emails, and you know the emails I'm talking about in the free report, which have never been given any context. The people who wrote them were never asked about them. But those emails, Free did not unearth them. They had been turned over, or Schultz had notified Cynthia Baldwin the January before that they were available. So anyway, which is neither here nor there in terms of, they were out there. And so the entire free report is based on, it's very incomplete. Now, they say their charge was not to interview Second Mile, not to interview the governor. However, that is part of the story. They are so interrelated. Because frankly, one of the things that so upsets me and so many alumni is that Penn State has become synonymous with Jerry Sandusky's crimes. Clearly, the guy is a pedophile. He's been convicted, put away, but because of and I truly believe, and I've been up here the last year and a half talking to everybody I can and reading everything I can, I truly believe that the actions of the board that first weekend where they pushed Spanier aside, whatever Spanier's role is in this and whether he knew more or didn't, who knows what, the fact, and we don't know.
Right.
People are making unbelievable assumptions, but the fact that the board said that weekend when the presentment leaked out, we are going to manage this crisis, you are not. So the Graham was forced to retire or to resign by Tuesday when all heck had broken loose. And so that, to me, was the fundamental mistake right there. And that allowed the media narrative to go crazy. Anal rape, and Paterno covered it up, and nobody, they were supposed to be managing it. Well, who was out telling the narrative? That's what the president of a university does. We had hundreds of media people here. They had to close the street off, the satellite dishes. No one spoke to them to say what was going on. Here's the story. We're going to get to the bottom of it. I truly believe if Spanier had been allowed to do his role, it would have been contained as it should have been. Mm-hmm. It was one presentment with charges that were not proven in trial. He would not have fired Paterno. We would then not have had the free report. We would not have had the NCAA sanctions. All of this.
Let's go to the free report and how President
Do we have an hour
took
here?
that. Yes, we do. We can go as far as we want. President Erickson's response to that. What was your thoughts on that?
On the NCAA.
Right.
Well, it's all been, you hear back and forth, and that the NCAA says we never made the death penalty threat. Erickson says we did. Well, I of course totally believe President Erickson. I have no doubt that's what he thought, but I don't think would have mattered. We should have insisted to the NCAA. Well, first off, we should have been prepared for this. Apparently, we had asked the NCAA to hold off on reviewing and making a decision until we had the free report, because I think the expectation was that it would really be a definitive report, which of course, many of us believe it was not. And when it came, and so they should have been, and maybe they were, in fairness, but I think there should have been a lot of back channel conversations. No doubt there were. But we should have had the best lawyers we could have found figuring out a strategy if the worst whatever came out in the free report. So we were ready. And the one thing we should have done is say we insist that you follow the processes, procedures, and rules that are clearly outlined, and not use a report which of course we all know the board has never, and did not have time that day to review and to try.
I don't want to cut you off, but we need to take another break.
Okay, thank you.
We're talking with Barb Duran, running for Penn State Board of Trustees. You're watching For the Record on WHVL. Back with more after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Our guest, Barbara Duran, who's running for the Penn State Board of Trustees. Barbara, when we stopped, we were talking about the end of the free report, the way the trustees responded, the way President Erickson responded. Let's talk now about what your ideas are to be on the board this time. Where do you think the board needs to go in terms of representing Penn State and especially the alumni?
Yeah. That is the key question. Well, number one, we have to get our governance issues straightened out. And in order, and I'll go back to that in a second, but the governance issues, we've got to get this, we've got to get all the distractions, we've got to get the reforms in place, we've got to get, people who really are prepared to go back and fight certain things. I know the current board feels we've got to just move forward, and it seems that they just want to forget everything that's happened.
Do you think they're doing that, the ones who are on the board, to try and just forget the past since they were on the board at that time? Is a quick cover-up for themselves? Not a cover-up, but just let's move their past beyond it. I don't want to disparage the current board members. I think it's a normal human thing. I think a lot of them are well-intentioned and really do want to move forward, but I don't think they understand that when you've allowed the university and key individuals who so represent the university's best values to be pilloried, and you don't stand up and fight for what has been best and was not broken at Penn State, you have to go back and fix that. Now, I think that we all want to move forward, but in order to focus on what's really important, which is continuing to maintain this high-quality education, and frankly, there's a lot of faculty members I am hearing and deans who are really having a tough time, deciding whether to stay or not. So this is a very difficult situation. So we want to, number one, maintain this quality education, but as important is we've got to make it affordable again. We all know what's going on in the entire country in terms of the debt load for kids. I mean, it's just, and with the economy and the job creation, which is going to be slow, it's going to be hard. So we have got to hold the line on tuition. And this year, I think the increase was low, but somehow we've got to figure out to hold it flat. Sure.
And that's, number one, cost cutting, reviewing everything. And I'm sure that's being done. I don't know. I would have access to that sort of thing once I was on the board.
With your background in finance, certainly you know what's going to happen with the economy and what's
I have
coming
opinions.
up. Right.
I have strong opinions.
Well,
yes.
And you should bring those to the table. That's sort of what,
Hopefully.
As a representative of alumni especially,
Yes,
from where I'm
so.
sitting as a parent of a student, that's important to keep costs at the same level.
Right.
Do you think the board is too big?
Well, that's another question, and this is part of the governance issues. Many people feel it is not, and the pros that I hear, and I hear this from some of the board members, are that, well, we have so many committee members, we need the work. I think, and I've been on not-for-profit boards for some 25 years in leadership positions and on all sorts of committees, and I've been on some very well-run ones and some highly dysfunctional ones with real governance issues. And I think when you have a board as large as this, it tends power, meaning the ones who make the decisions, tends to devolve to an executive committee. And I think that is what has happened here. I think things were so good at Penn State for so long, a lot of board members didn't pay maybe as close attention as they might have. I think a smaller board is more agile, you can get things done. I think you can fill the committees with plenty of non-board members, you can get the work done. So I think it should be reduced in size for agility, accountability, and to make sure everybody's really engaged.
Well, that goes to another thing you're talking about, running for transparency and accuracy within the departments.
Yes.
Do you have an idea, a number in terms of how many alumni representatives should be versus appointees?
Well, I'd rather talk about in general terms, because clearly
Sure.
if we reduce the size of the board, the number of alumni representatives has to go down. And as a matter of fact, there are a number of people on the board who are also alumni. But the alumni now being elected are clearly there to represent really what's going on now and to be much as responsive as can. Everybody should be responsive. But I think there's actually broader structural issues like the agriculture. I mean, that was okay 100 years ago or
Right.
50 years ago,
Land
but
Grant
we are no
University when it
longer,
started, yes.
we are no longer an ag focused school. It's a big part and we have a big impact, research, et cetera. So yes, they should be on there, but not so many. And also theirs is a very closed system in how they elect people. And so I think that needs to be re-examined. You know, business and industry originally had been, it was changed I think in 01, 02, where they were elected by business associations in the state. It was changed to in the board. Now all of this, if you're going to have appointed people, and this is what I was getting to earlier about Penn State or PS4,
Right.
their process, they have a committee who screens out all these people and tries to come up with the best ones. And the 6 that have come, and I just get me out of this, I don't want to be talking about myself, but the 5 are very, high caliber people. I mean, I think any of the 6 that PS4 is looking at right now would do a great job. And so it may not be a bad idea. I mean, you really need to open up the business and industry, have, a committee, have much more input and get it down to a group, and then you can have the board vote on it.
What are your thoughts on what Penn State should do to find a new president? President Erickson was a temporary. What do you think your thoughts are on
I
finding
want
a
to
new
get to that.
president?
And I have one quick thing because I know
Go
we're
ahead.
running out of time.
Yes, we're running out
On the
of time.
governor, too many people, 10 people, including the governor, on the board. We get rid of 3 people who run the departments should be off. We don't need them. This is from a long time ago, and 6 governor appointees who are, they're all who is their priority? State.
Sure.
It has to be, and then Penn State. So I think that has to be cut down dramatically. But anyway, back to the president. Well, they have hired headhunters for the first time. They never used an outsized, and I guess I should say a search firm. Sorry about that, his headhunters out there. But they have apparently tried to find ones that really can specialize in finding a good president. You need to do that. So it is a broad search, needs to be open. And the question then is, what's the criteria? And who are the people in the committee? And can we find the right person? So anyway.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Why don't you direct people that have watched the show to your website to learn more about your candidacy?
Thank you. Yes, if anybody's having trouble falling asleep at night, I have Twitter and Facebook, and I'm on the PS4 Elms page. But
The website.
www.Doran, D-O-R-A-N, 4, the number, Penn State Board.
Thank you very much for being here, Barbara.
you.
Really appreciate it. You've been watching For the Record. Thanks for joining us. Take care. Bye-bye.